trail and ultra runners, what is going on? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast. As always, I am your humble host, Coach Jason Koop, and I am back from a 2-week hiatus. The cause of that hiatus is neither here nor there, but you can probably hear it a little bit in my voice and throughout the course of this podcast. This podcast is with one of my favorite coaches on the entire planet, one of the best mountain bike coaches in the world, one of the best cycling coaches in the world, and somebody who I have had the privilege of working with for nearly 20 years now, and that is Adam Pulford. Adam and I wanted to dissect this recent paper coming out of Norway, all about training quality and how we can define quality training from the get-go, starting from the plan that you actually develop way before you put pen to paper and determine that you want to run 2 hours today or 2 hours tomorrow, whatever your training plan actually looks like for the week. The reason that this is so important is because I know many of you are ramping your training up right now in advance of this race season that is continually unfolding right in front of us. So I hope the content of this podcast helps you direct the training that you do day to day, week to week, and also the plan that you put behind that training. We also spend a little bit of time bantering on one of the things that is my new fascination, and that is high performance coaching, or some of these coaching groups that we have started to wrap around athletes. Adam happens to have a little bit of experience in that, and he is also on one of the high performance teams with me. And so we offer a little bit of our perspective in terms of how we might actually see this shape up in the trail and ultra running realm when it has already been established in other endurance sports like cycling, running, and in triathlon. Okay, folks, with that intro, I am getting right out of the way. Here's my conversation with Adam Pulford, all about what constitutes quality training. I figure we're going to talk about quality training, what constitutes quality training. And then if we have a little bit of time, we'll talk a little bit about some of this high performance stuff that we've been doing.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think to that point, this all got brought up because of the podcast that I run, the Time Crunch Cyclist. I was answering an audience question, and I said something about quality training and blah, 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 and make sure quality remains high. And so an audience member wrote in and they said, I basically know what you mean by what you said. You're basically saying intensity needs to remain high. But a lot of endurance athletes and coaches just throw around the term quality. And so can you specifically define quality training more? And I was like, ooh. So I started doing my research. It led me to Alex Hutchinson, who I big fan of, got him on the podcast. We had a good conversation about it. But more and more, I think it is a very relevant thing to talk about with our athletes, amongst our coaches, and just like, what the heck is it? How do we define it? How do we track it?
Well, I think we need to start with our coaches, to be honest with you, or coaches in general, like maybe not so much our coaches, but coaches in general, because you're right that we tend to throw around that term a lot. But I would guarantee you, if you let me lay a bet down in Vegas on this, if you really pinned a coach down and asked them, how would you objectively define quality training? If this training session or group of sessions is of high quality, how would you, and you could have subjective metrics as well. How would you define that?
Well,
and they would have a hard time coming up with the answer. That's the bet that I would make, is that people would be like, blah, 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 like they because they haven't thought about it.
Well, that's it, Coop. And I think even for me, I've been coaching for almost, we're coming up on 19 years, almost 20 years now. And when I got that question, I was like, boom, they'll slam this out of the park. Quick podcast, 15 minutes and we're done. And it really pushed me, because I was like, man, I need to get organized about this and communicate. But I needed to pull someone else in, and it was an expert in the field. So.
Okay, so let's encapsulate that a little bit to start out with. So you already did your research. Like, now you can give us the elevator pitch, and we can be done with this podcast in like 3 minutes.
Yeah. So elevator pitch is start with a plan. Hopefully it's a good one. Communicate the plan, have aspects to track within that communication to the athlete, and then the athlete does it and then does what they did line up with the plan in terms of RPE, pace, power, total time, whatever the objectives were. Then you talk about it, see how closely it matched, and then does that session fit into the global plan overall. So it's really the big picture plan, the individual session plan, and then how that tracks depending on how long you want to go out.
Okay, can I poke a hole in your elevator pitch?
You can freaking poke away, man.
Yeah, because I've been doing this to you for almost 20 years, as you just mentioned. That is all fine and good, but it is contingent on the plan.
Oh, for sure. And that's okay.
Hold on, I'm not done yet. Yeah, and the plan fitting what is going to be conducive for performance to the athlete.
For sure. But that's where you said, so to be fair, you said elevator pitch, right? And so you start, and so you have to
you go to the very top
down.
floor. You're not on the the rooftop deck yet. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and that's it. Because if you're like, okay, give it to me in 90 seconds, it's like you got to start somewhere. You start with a plan. And even in my podcast with Alex, he brought it up. He's like, "What if your plan's shitty?" I'm like,
yeah. I know. I mean, because we see this all the time in coaching. It's like, okay, yeah, that session accomplishes what you say, or it will probably accomplish what you say it's going to accomplish. But is what you're trying to accomplish actually going to matter for performance? Those are two very different things that you can kind of get at. You can get one right and not the other. You can get neither one of them right. And we see this all the time within workout architecture and overall plan design and things like that. But make no mistake, you need both, right? Yeah. And so I kind of go back to the basement of the elevator pitch being, first off, know what the determinants of performance are. From a physiological perspective, from a psychological perspective, like what are the things that are going to enable performance the most? And then how are you going to tune the knob, so to speak, or dial the training, this, that, or the other, with workout structure and overall architecture to achieve those ends? I kind of view it as a sequential process that starts with what are the performance determinants first, and then designing the training from a global perspective, and then also from a session by session perspective around those performance determinants.
Yeah, it's a very good way of putting it. And along those lines, I think it's fruitful to put in there the performance aspects, like you said, as well as the strengths and weaknesses too.
Sure. Yeah.
So you put that in, and then we have this grand plan of how we go. And what's interesting, and we can take it down this direction too, but like you and I work with athletes one-on-one, individual. And so you're usually just driving that ship when it comes to big picture plan, annual plan, monthly plan, weekly plan to the session. Then we work with elite athletes where there's other cooks in the kitchen, and we got to be on the same plan, or same page for those planning things. And sometimes you're the one with the master plan as well as the individual session, but then we're pulling on threads from all this other stuff to make sure that who's ever doing stuff psychologically or nutritionally or coachology wise, everybody's
wise. You're making that up right now.
Yeah, made it up. That we are all kind of funneling into high quality training and high quality coaching, and that's tricky one too when you got multiple cooks in the kitchen.
We're going to talk about that probably at the end of the podcast, since you and I are on a couple of these high performance teams, and it's been a recent fascination and fixation of mine. And it's my podcast, so I can talk about whatever I want to. But let's kind of go back to the basement, right? So these are the performance determinants. I'm going to lay out a really simplistic scenario to hopefully kind of like drive this home, and I'm going to bridge. Excuse me. Both the cycling world, which is your world, and then the ultrarunning world, which is my world. Just to set the table, how long is it going to take an elite athlete to do a 1 kilometer race on the track? Just so the listeners can know.
For men, less than a minute, like 50 seconds.
50 seconds. Okay.
Yeah. 50.
I was recently out at the Canyons 100, and the lead men were 8-ish hours and lead women were 9-ish hours. It's going to kind of a ball, right? So we've got these two different events. Cycling event on one side, running event on the other side. Cycling event is less than a minute. Running event is 8 or 9 hours. Needless to say, the performance determinants for either one of those races are markedly different. Fair statement?
Fair statement.
Okay. Now let's tailor this down a little bit more. Give me an example of I'm going to give you an example because I just came up with the best one. Let's look at the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike.
Oof, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long does it take the leaders to do that race?
6 and change. I think it's like 6:40-ish, 6:30-ish now.
Yeah, 6-ish. Now, let's compare and contrast that with, once again, I was just at Canyons this last week, 8-hour race. You have a 6-hour race, you have an 8-hour race. That's not that different.
This is a better example. Yeah.
This is why I started with the easy one, and now we're going to get to this. That's not that different from a time perspective. Right, they're close. Let's just say we're coaching a 9-hour Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike finisher. That would be me the only year that I did the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike. I did it in 9 hours. So now we have the duration of the events being very similar. Are the determinants of those events similar as well?
No.
Okay. You're the cyclist. I'm going to go for, you can first start out, and then I'll do the running side. What would the determinants of the cycling side be? What would enable the athlete to succeed in that race from a physiological perspective? What things do you need to accentuate during the training process that are extremely important in that type of race?
Yeah. So overall, big picture is build the aerobic engine. This is kind of our classic general base building phase, building up time in the saddle up to a point where we can determine, okay, now the aerobic system, we can move on and start to add intensity. But from that volume standpoint, because I've got some hard markers on that, but at some point I'm going to change and really focus on functional threshold power, FTP, because that's going to be the biggest determiner when it comes to performance if we have some performance goals, sub 9, whatever. But the volume for that one is still high. However, the intensity, especially at FTP, is super important. So I want to make sure that that is as high as I can get it 4 weeks out, do a couple more long rides, come to it fresh. And we haven't even talked about altitude.
Okay, let's leave the altitude piece of it out, not to confound it too much. An athlete during that race, what's the range of physiology that they're going to elicit?
Just from like an energy system standpoint?
Well, energy systems or percent of VO2 max or percent of FTP, you can create anchor point wherever you want to, whatever the listeners you think will resonate with. Because I'll matchy that on my side.
Yeah. A shit ton of time in zone 2 and 3. And then we're hitting low zone 4 on key hill climbs and watch it there so we don't blow up. So
super like harder than threshold for those climbs.
Yeah. Like and depending on like that athlete, right? Like careful because again, at altitude, like you don't want to burn it too hot in zone 4 because you can blow up. That's the volatile spot.
How much time would they spend above an intensity factor of 1? So just to explain to the listeners, the intensity factor of 1 would be basically at your functional threshold power or your functional threshold pace, which is the pace you could sustain for about an hour. Like how much time during the Leadville Trail 100 for an elite athlete would they spend above a intensity factor of 1?
Well, an elite athlete, I would say, is different than a sub 9. So we can talk about it.
Are you trying to tell me that I'm not elite? I'm just barely.
Yes, I just told you that in a very roundabout way. So let's put it this way.
Elite athlete, I'm going to matchy on the elite side.
Okay. So for an elite athlete, I wouldn't be as concerned about spending more time in that, say, zone 4 or intensity factor of 1.0, especially if they've spent some time up at altitude. They're going to have to do that, but you don't want to super hang out there because that's the point at which you're going to fatigue faster. So I want to stay under. And then how much time at? I actually haven't had an elite do Leadville in some time, but I would say no more than 75 minutes of time spent at like a 1.0, and that's dosed throughout the whole time. For my non-elites, less, and don't, again, it's more like a shit ton of time in zone 3 for my non-elites.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So now let's go to the running side of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the hallmark is, from a performance determinant perspective, the elite athletes in a race like that are running at the high end of their zone 2 or endurance zone for pretty much the entire time. The climbing is about 5% more intense than the descending. And if you break the files down, the climbs are at about an intensity factor of like 0.85 or maybe 0.9 for some of them. The climbs are 30 minutes long, 20 minutes long, things like that. And, 4 or 5 chunks. And the rest of the race is at an intensity factor of like 0.7 or 0.75. So I guess my point is there's zero time spent at threshold and not a lot of time even really all that close to it. There might be 5 minutes at an intensity factor of 0.1 or something like that. So my point with the compare and contrast is, even when the time domain is very similar, the performance determinants or the physiology that's elicited during the race can actually be markedly different depending upon, we were picking running and cycling, but even if you look intra-discipline, an 8-hour cycling race or 6.5-hour cycling race at the Leadville Trail 100 can be markedly different than another type of 6.5-hour cycling race in terms of how the race actually plays out and what physiology is actually elicited.
Oh, yeah, 100% agreed. And as I'm sitting here thinking too, and then maybe somebody will be like, oh no, here's Keegan Swenson's file and he had this much time at zone 4 and 5.
It's always going to be somebody.
Yeah, there always will be. But I think the other thing that I think about is I'm like visual too. Is 2 things. One, with cycling, when we rack up time in zone, it's very stochastic. So it can rack up over time in a lot of spikes, right? So that's different too, because it's like intermediate or intermittent as it goes. And then the second thing, 3 things. Second thing is we have a ton of time descending where we're not beating up our body, right? So we have this like kind of U-shaped curve when it comes to a very high performing athlete in a race like this, where it's a ton of time in zone 1, ton of time in zone 4, some up in 5. In that ton of time in zone 1, or recovery is coasting downhill, where you guys are running downhill.
Yeah,
very much more medium. So that polarization, that contrast is actually not to be overlooked when you're looking at the performance disciplines or the performance indicators of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So the descent, as opposed to, I'm gonna try to use intensity factor as an anchor point, because I think a lot of people it'll kind of resonate with. Yeah. So the descents for a hilly 100K, I'm using canyons as an example because I was just there, is going to be around 0.75 or 0.70 for the elite athletes. That's still running at a reasonable pace, right? That's not 0 watts.
It's not 0 watts.
Not 0 watts. Not even.
It's not 0 watts. And I would say that Leadville, even I consider it not to be technical, but if you're not proficient descender, it's also not 0 watts. But for those who are better at descending, it's kind of 0 watts.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I forget my exact point with that exercise. Oh yeah, now I remember. It's to set this basement, this ground floor principle of what are the performance determinants, right? In terms of how you are actually going to gauge what is high quality workouts. And I think from a coaching perspective, the first step in that is know what the freaking demands of the event are. You and I have been through coaching hiring rounds, and I can tell this story because it's been circulated around the sphere for a while. One of the one of the screening tools that we use is to give people case studies. And we give them a case study. It's usually based off of one of our real athletes, and then they go back and figure out a training plan for them, and they describe that training plan to the group. And more often than not, we'll have a decent handful of potential candidates that come back and they have this elaborate plan with all these intervals and structured this and psychology that, and I'm going to do high intensity over here, and this is going to be a 3-minute interval, and then I'm going to change to 3.5-minute intervals, and all this kind of like nuance. And then you ask them what the time duration of the event is, and they usually flub it. Very basic. This is the demand of the event. It's a 6-hour event. It's a 9-hour event. It's a 12-hour event. And then you can drill into, okay, well, how much time are they spending in whatever intensity construction that you want to come up with, whether it's a zone-based intensity, construction or heart rate or power or pace or RPE or whatever. So anyway, so my pathway, right, the map that I'm reading at least to what is high quality training starts out with, what are the freaking demands of the event and what are the things that you want to elicit in order to ready the athlete for the demands of that event.
Yeah. And that's so at the very highest level, you're ensuring that you have a good plan to start from, to work with. And that will trickle down, even though trickle down economics doesn't work. This will trickle down. Sorry. This will trickle down a proper, high quality training program to your athlete, in my opinion.
Okay. So now we can go into the next component, right? Let's just assume that we get the plan right? We have a good overall plan. Now let's go to structure and to the individual sessions, which I think the paper that we're referencing that I'll link up in the show notes. It's not its exclusive orientation, but it's its primary orientation. There's a lot of there's a lot of dialogue being spent around how do you organize a session or a series of sessions such that it elicits a high quality training. Mm-hmm. You can take the lead on this one. So in your estimation and you're figuring out, how do we look at the individual sessions and ensure that they are high quality?
Well, this goes back to my elevator pitch, and to be brief about it, and then you can whittle some holes in it all you want. Once you have a good plan pulled out of Koop's basement, you can then create sessions, right? And let's say that you have a planned session for the day. You communicate that to the athlete. The athlete goes and executes it. Then you have a kind of a debriefing or some evaluation of the athlete, uploads the file and see if the RPE matches with what we're trying to do or the power, the pace, whatever. Then I would then say that a good coach or a good coach athlete process goes back to the planning and preparation aspect of it to say, okay, is this really doing what we want it to be doing based on this overall good plan? And then we keep on cycling down.
Yes. And this is, once again, we got to come back to coaching. Mm-hmm. Does the workout actually do what you want it to do?
Right.
So classic example, JT Kearney actually gave me this example the other, when we were talking about it in a podcast a long time ago, and he probably did it to me when we were in person. He's like, listen, I could give you a workout that would absolutely floor you. Like you would be annihilated afterwards. Yet it probably wouldn't serve the purpose of eliciting any sort of remote endurance adaptation. Let's just do this. I want you to do 50 burpees, run 100 meters, do another 50 burpees, run back, do another 100 meters, do another 50 burpees, run back, do another 100 meters until you have 1,000 meters of distance covered. That would probably take an hour. You would probably be absolutely annihilated afterwards. Your heart rate would probably be pretty high during that entire session. If you were just to not know what was going on and then just look at the heart rate response for it, it would look like a hard endurance effort, right? Yet it's not going to accomplish anything that you would remotely want to accomplish in an endurance application, right? I use that as a silly example. Nobody is actually doing that. But we do see, you and I, both professionals, longtime professionals, we do see sessions that are designed and don't accomplish the goal that they were designed for. And I'll give you a very practical one that I see all of the time in the running sphere, and I bet you see this in the cycling sphere as well. So you can elicit a VO2 max adaptation in kind of two fundamental ways. You can do it through a shit ton of volume, low intensity volume, and you can do it with a reasonable amount of high intensity work. Now we're going to leave the zone 2 conversation in the rearview mirror for now, because
let's leave it there. But some of the terms that I've been using, if you want to use them, is you can push it up aerobically, or you can pull it up with intensity.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's totally fine. But on the intensity side of things, you have to have two fundamental components. The intensity has to be high enough, and you have to have enough of it. Mm-hmm. You might say that you need enough of it continuously, and that's a kind of debated nuance that we'll shove that into the corner for now as well. And they've done a lot of research on it. In fact, a lot of the original research on this was done by a trail runner, Veronk Balat, and everybody for a long period of time will recognize the BA. BA 30-30s, right? 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds easy until you accumulate 12 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever at intensity. Yeah. She did a lot of the original research on it, and I believe she won the Zagama trail race in like 1982 or something like that, a long time ago. Fun little factoid. Anyway, so my point with the high intensity side of it is you have to have both the intensity side correct as well as the volume of that intensity side correct. Mm-hmm. And through all of this research, it's about over 12 minutes, might be able to justify 10 minutes for an early stage athlete of time at intensity above 90% of your VO2 max. So the intensity side is above 90% of your VO2 max, and the time is that you need to eclipse is probably 12, maybe 10 in some cases. And you can come up with all kinds of architecture to do that. 2-minute intervals, 3-minute intervals, 1-minute intervals, 30-second intervals like the BA intervals, 4-minute intervals, and things like that. But those two fundamental things need to exist. The error that we have both seen, that I see a lot in the running side, is 10 by 1 minute hard, 1 minute easy for a good athlete. And that's not enough of the second component, the time at intensity, to elicit enough of a response for it to be a robust adaptation.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I think the best way I can describe this with my athletes, what I try to do is teach them while I'm coaching. And when we're talking about the reason why we're using intervals to do VO2 max or whatever interval, but VO2 max is interesting in this response, is because we call this as aerobic crossover point, where if you have continuous exercise of around 75 seconds and longer, you start to pull in oxygen, or you start to become using oxygen as a primary fuel source over that 50% marker. Okay. And this is that crossover point of kind of that continuous effort that I show athletes, where they start to go a little bit more aerobic. And man, I could get filleted for this because no, the glycolytic energy system is super high at 75 seconds. And fair. But that continuous, that's what we're really talking about. So for when I'm the very minimum that I would use for a great interval is 90 seconds, even as a standalone interval. And that's setting aside like the on-off stuff for right now. But I use at least 90 seconds if I'm trying to do something from a VO2 standpoint. And then I make sure that it's kind of over 15 minutes. I know 12, 15, whatever. And then I probably go up to 25 minutes total with an asterisk of total time in zone per session.
So there, I mean, for the audience that is kind of getting lost in the weeds here, I describe workout structure a lot in training essentials for ultra running. And what I'll do is I'll link like an excerpt of how to design some of these intervals in the show notes, because there's a reason why I've set out the structure the way that I've set out the structure. And the reason is because when you do any combination of intervals, kind of doesn't like, you can prescribe a power output or a pace output, but just by way of the combination of the interval time, the recovery time, and the number of intervals, you're going to get the athlete into the right intensity just by a byproduct of that. So there's a reason why, there's a very deliberate reason why you see the structure that you actually see, because each one of the workouts is kind of targeted at a specific piece of the athlete's physiology. Not that that's the only thing that gets developed. Continuum. They're not, buttons that we're pushing. They're knobs that we're turning up, or levers that we're gradually dialing up or dialing down. But they're the architecture of any of those workouts is very deliberately designed to hit both the intensity component that I mentioned earlier, as well as the volume of that intensity, depending upon what we want to do throughout various pieces of the season. So my point is you don't need to be a physiologist to figure out like, oh, you need over 12 minutes at over 90% of your VO2 max. If you just construct the workout correctly, you can paint by numbers to a certain extent. And this is what a lot of coaches do. They don't know the physiology behind it. They're just painting by numbers from previous coaches, right? You can just paint by numbers, and you can achieve a high quality session if that's the thing that you actually want to identify.
Yeah. And don't church it up. I think like,
what does that mean? Don't church it up?
Don't church it up.
I've never heard that phrase.
Are you kidding? Watch Joe Dirt, man.
I don't go to church.
Well, no, you don't even need to go to church, but don't church it up. Don't make it fancier than it needs to be.
Okay, got it.
And that's what I see coaches do all the time. They get it. And you made a nod to that before, where it's like 3 minutes here, 30 seconds here, 2 minutes there. It's like, what the hell are you doing? Like training, like effective training is actually monotonous and kind of boring. Like it can be boring, right? And the longer I coach, the more I see that. So I would say training prescription is easy or fast, but actual coaching takes time. Knowing what to deploy, building something, whatever, 30 seconds for a session. Got it.
I recently had to do this because I think I told you I was working on this AI project.
Yeah.
And one of the engineers asked me to like categorize all the workouts that I prescribe. There's only like 20 of them.
Yeah.
I thought I had like hundreds of permutations of workouts, and I actually started looking at it. I'm like, no, you know what? Like probably 90% of this prescription or 95% of the prescription comes down to like 30 workouts. Not even 100, not even close to 100, like 20, 30 where I can't remember what the actual number was. I was like, oh man, this is way. And then I was like, yeah, you know what though? I don't need to complicate it more than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should be that simple. And then so if a listener is like, well, how come like we have all these variations on Trainer Road or Zwift, or I don't know what's the equivalent in your world? Do you go Zwift Koopling for 3 hours on a customized squiggly program?
But they're definitely, yeah. I mean, there's all different ways that you can contrive these intervals with different permutations of the recovery, right? Do you want to do a recovery, as they call it, float recoveries in the track world, right? You want to do a recovery at a slightly higher intensity, or do you want to like undulate the work period and do one at 110% of your threshold, and the next one at 106% of your threshold, and all this other. So anyway, they exist, but they're not as codified as Zwift and some of the virtual cycling platforms have done.
Yeah, and I don't mean to diminish some of those other platforms, because variety and entertainment leads to some motivation. So if you want to do that once in a while, all good. To change it up. But I would say
honest about it. That's what I like. If you're designing a workout for entertainment purposes, or if you're creating a permutation of a workout just for entertainment purposes, just say, hey, this is different because it's entertaining. It's equally or slightly less effective than the original one, but I just want a little bit of variety. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't like church it up, to use my new vocabulary. Exactly. Don't church it up and say, glycolytic pathway this and lactate, and like come up with some stupid, like nonsensical answer of why it's actually different. Just be honest and say, listen, I don't want to be boring.
Yeah. Here's one good example in the cycling world. Saturday comes, got an athlete. We're in the shoulder season. It's March, whatever. And I say, plan A, hit the group ride. Okay. Plan B, do this workout. And it's, intensive threshold mix. And it's just a compilation of zone 2 and 5, just a little bit all over.
Like
but
Adam's random sandwich of workouts.
Yeah, it's a sandwich, right? But it's not a crazy sandwich, and that's where when it comes to like intensity factors and time and zone, like I make sure, but I have like a copy of that, and I just like tweak a couple things here and there, make sure it's appropriate for the athlete. Boom, done. That's all it is.
But you're honest about, it's not like you're not coming up with like, oh, this is the magic reason why this workout is here. Like you're like, listen, you're mimicking the variety or the stochastic nature of a group ride.
Exactly. Because the way I build that workout, the intensity factor is going to be very, very close to what they'll get in the group ride overall. And the intensity, the absolute intensities may be higher in the group ride. And the average power may be higher on the indoor intensity mixture cocktail because they're not coasting. So anyway.
Okay. So
back to performance determinants.
Well, we went through that. Then we went through the workout construction. And my honest, simple advice to people out there, just go look at the workout construction that's publicly available that I've come up with. I'm not going to say that I'm the only one out there that's done it. I begged, borrowed, and stealed from people before me. Right. But I think it's a pretty good synopsis of, if you want a high intensity workout, here are your different permutations of it. If you want a threshold E workout, here are your different, variations of it. Like it's all out there and it's freely available. Just start there. You don't have to make it up. Let's go to after the fact though, because I started putting a little bit more emphasis on this I'll tell everybody why later, but I've been putting a lot more emphasis on this after the fact piece to kind of elicit a high quality training session. But I want to know what you do. I mean, I know what you do because we work together, but I want the listeners to hear what you do first, and then we can riff off of that a little bit.
What I do first in what? Sorry, what context?
On the feedback side of things. So athlete goes and does workout. You obviously analyze the file, right?
Yep.
What is the rest of the feedback loop? I don't want to take that for granted. Hold on. Let's put a pin in something. Every file that comes across the wire for every single athlete that you coach gets some level of scrutiny.
No. Well,
okay. Which ones don't?
So that's a great question. And I'm going to say no, like straight up, but it is not true. I would say, so here's why.
Yeah. I want to know which ones don't.
Yeah. So when I start working with an athlete, I'll tell them, I'm going to over communicate at the very beginning, make sure that you get educated, get up to speed on how coaching works. Then I make sure that they're good, they're not confused, and we have a good rhythm going. And I tell them that the interval, or that the sessions that we'll scrutinize over, that we'll get feedback over, are mostly structured stuff, intensity stuff. But even at the very beginning, if I see things in the aerobic training side of things, we're going to press into that. So I'll scan the zone 2 endurance stuff to make sure we're on board there. And I'll make quick comments on, great job. Yes, that was good, especially initially. But as I get going with my athletes, I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to thumbs up on a zone 2 3-hour ride. Like, you're a big girl, you're a big boy, you should be able to do that. If there's a problem with it, make a comment on Training Peaks, send me a text message, whatever. But like, that sort of scrutiny doesn't get on my end.
But you at least, hold on.
Yeah.
We have different definitions of the word scrutiny. You're at least seeing that there's a 3-hour ride there.
Oh yeah. So I guess like,
okay. So my point is, let me rephrase. Yeah. Every single file that comes across the wire gets some, I'm going to emphasize this just so we're on the same page, some level of scrutiny. Some of those files get a lot of scrutiny. Some of those files get very little, maybe none, maybe slightly above none. And like I said, you just check, is the time there? Is the average power reasonable, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, okay. So to answer your point, or answer your question a little bit more, every week I'm like at least scanning, making sure that there's like green week on Training Peaks. If not green week, why not green? What color, right? If those who know Training Peaks, green means great, you did it in terms of the volume. Orange means somewhat in there. Red means you didn't do it, or you're so off.
I love the people who gamify the percentages once they know that they can change them.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Green, and then once they know, then it's like it's green all the time. But like the reality is, it's Christmas tree. Like there's stuff going on in people's life, like red, green, yellow, blank, whatever. Okay, so make sure green. Okay, but then the way I would say house my data and analyze my data, everything's going into what I'm looking at in order to see what athletes are doing from a TSS, total volume, training impulses on various short and long-term levels, as well as mean max power curves over time. So on one sense, you could say, I look at every single second of every single data piece that an athlete does, because that's what a mean max power curve shows. Meanwhile, the performance management chart is the athlete's story and their responses to it. So from a big data standpoint, I'm looking at stuff all the time that influences them. And it's a very powerful way of looking at it. And I think that that's what athletes need to understand is a coach doesn't need to go in every single day and make comments every single day. They need to scan and then use better tools to faster evaluate in order to give feedback on what they're doing.
Yeah, the way I describe the process is zoom in and then zoom out and then zoom back in again. So
much better way of putting it.
You get the file, you zoom into the file. Hey, what's going on here? Okay, zoom back out. How does that file fit in the big picture of things? And then zoom back in for the feedback. So let's get over the pedantic scrutiny vocabulary.
The word scrutiny, man, it threw me off.
I'm gonna figure out how to soften that up the next time we have a conversation about it. Let's go through the feedback loop, because I think this is super important. My point with the scrutiny side of it is you're looking at the files in some way, shape, or form, right? You've got a structure. You describe the structure in which you evaluate them. But there is something there, and other coaches are going to use a different way of evaluating their athletes' workouts and things like that. But I want to go through what a reasonable run of show would be from a feedback perspective. So file comes across the wire. Let's just assume it's a group ride, a race, important workout, something like that, something where you have to apply some level of acute analysis to, right? Something on that one particular one. How are you orienting yourself to provide the feedback to the athlete in order to facilitate this quality training that was the kind of origination of this podcast?
Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing is I look at the comments. Mm-hmm. So I read the comments, actually. And I used to not do that as much, by the way. More and more I read the comments first, then I look at the data, then I see if they align. If there's no comments, I look at data, and the first question I ask is, how'd you feel? What was perceived effort today? How did the legs feel? Those sort of questions, various iterations. My wife has made a joke is like, the only question you know is, how'd your legs feel today? Because it's just asking that all the time, right? But the perceived effort is so important, because if I get data, and let's just say they freaking crush it, right? They hit all these peak power numbers and they just like obliterated all-time stuff.
All the Strava KOMs.
All the Strava KOM. They got all the crowns for both like male and female crowns. They went so fat, they're just stacking them up, right? But if they felt like shit, that is very different from, I felt awesome, right? And now the story starts to unfold, because if they felt like poo, okay, what about fueling? If they felt great, what about fueling? What about sleep? All this kind of stuff. So I think first I read comments. I look for, lately Training Peaks they've been doing some cool stuff in terms of the frowny faces, the smiley faces.
I love the frowny faces and smiley faces.
And it can go either way. Like frowny face because it was super technical. I thought I was going to die, and oh my God. But I was producing good power.
I'm here for it.
Versus, man, I was crushing that power. I almost died a few times, but that was awesome. Smile face. And I call that qualitative data because it's the quality of how the quantitative data went. So I'm first looking for qualitative, then I look at the quantitative. And if I have any further questions, I will reach out to the athlete. But I have a couple of varying things I look at peak powers relative to where we're at right now and then current time zone to thumbs, if that was the point of the workout or not, to shape up how it went. How was that first starting point?
So that's first off, I'm going to get to the next point of this, but I want to circle back on a couple really cool points that you mentioned. You're starting with the subjective or the, the qualitative data, to use your vocabulary, even though you have cyclists with power meters and you have really good data.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say with the vast majority of those athletes, you have really good data. I mean, there's out there just like there's shit other technology, but I think that that's remarkable because you could very easily say, I'm going to go to their best 5-minute power, or I'm going to go to the training stress score first, or I'm going to look at what the power duration curve looked like, or some technical component that is readily and easily accessible by virtue of having an onboard power meter. You're still coming back to the framework, starting with how did you feel? And then going to the quantitative data from the power meter and seeing if they're matching up or providing some level of analysis between the subjective and the objective.
And I'll say this, like I used to not do it that way. I used to kind of the opposite. Yeah. But the more I coach, the more I'm like, I got this wrong. Like it needs to, and it provides a better like output.
I have to do that because our data is shit in trail running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you learn how to read through the GPS files onto the technicity of the surface, which that's the biggest obscuring factor with the data that you're getting. If you learn how to do that, you can get reasonable information from the GPS files. But I still start with the subjective almost it's kind of where I have to, but I also think that it's the best framework. In fact, my outstanding request that I've had for 20 years now, Dirk Friel, if you're listening to this, please make this come true. 20 years is I want to customize what I see first in the email notifications from Training Peaks. So for the athletes that are out there, or the coaches that are out there that aren't listening to this, that don't use Training Peaks, there's this notification system that the coaches get. Adam Pulford has completed XYZ workout. And the way that it works is file gets uploaded, that file gets kind of held in a queue for the post-activity comments to come through the wire. And then after the queue expires or the post-activity comments get entered, that triggers this email off to the athlete and to the coach that the workout's kind of completed. The structure of that email is hero metrics first, time, average heart rate, blah, 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 blah. Post-activity comments second. I have always wanted to be able to customize those emails to see the post-activity comments, the subjective data or the qualitative data first, and then the hero metric second. And I've never won that battle.
Yeah. I mean, well, they should have a coach and then the athlete side, because the athlete side, they're just feeding kind of the ego of the athlete with the hero metrics, right? The coach, I would say, yeah, if we can flip it, that's a great idea. I never even thought about that.
You know what? I'll give another example. I remember years ago, Suunto, and I don't like their watches, but this is probably the most ingenious thing that they did. They baked into the user flow within their watches this smiley-faced subjective feedback tool that came up when you stopped the workout. So you go and do a workout, you hit the stop button, and then it asks you how your workout went, and you can give it a little smiley face rating like right then and there, which I think is really powerful because you've just finished. And that's the time that you should kind of like compress okay, how did I feel? Like I actually remember that now versus like 10 minutes later when you're sitting down at your computer after the file's uploaded and you get to, the keyboard, blah, 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 blah. Like that, the workflow, of doing it right then and there, I thought was really, really nifty. Okay, let's get to the second part.
Yeah. Second part. Here we go.
Well, we're both samesies on this. We go to the subjective first, and then the objective second, and see how they match up. So I want to know what Adam Pulford does next. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and for audience members, because Koop doesn't prepare anything ahead of time, we didn't even collab on that one.
No, we didn't. There's certain guests where I know I get away with not having much of an outline.
No, that's true. And I love it when that stuff happens, especially like in real time, because that's like a very good indicator that we're on the right page and also doing the right thing. So anyway, stage 2, what?
2. Okay. So I want to know this. Are you giving your athletes kudos, for lack of a better word? I had to invoke the Strava kudos a little bit. Like, are you saying like, good job, and then what's the context? Good job, bad job, and then what's the context of that? Like, are you wrapping it in with the data? Is it meaningful to the process and somehow? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, good question. I thought initially you were asking me if I follow all my athletes on Strava. I don't. I hate Strava.
Neither do
I. Man, it's different. Like, honestly, it is different because there's times where I would say I give like kudos sandwiches. if that's a thing, because I want, like, I'm here to give you feedback. I'm not here just to be a cheerleader, but there's going to be some cheerleading that goes on because I want you to know that I care. I want you to know, hey, I see effort. That's good. So great workout today, Benita. You need to get that heart rate down during the recovery periods a little bit more. So try a fan or just stop pedaling.
Technical piece, right?
Right, technical piece. But I really like the way that you finished. And it's usually, in 30 seconds of assessing the way I do things, it's usually a kudos sandwich with a little nugget of here's how to improve if we do. But if they absolutely crushed it, everything's like, let's just say an interval workout, time and zones, great. Recovery periods are cool. 75 minutes was prescribed and they did 75 minutes in 1 second because they're type A. And they love that. Awesome workout. Double kudos. That's the way I do it. Then the one asterisk here too is I think the way, and that's like kind of on a per session basis, but I would say like quarterly, monthly for some of my athletes, or after like big builds or stage races or something like that, I do what I call deep dives into the data. I do a Zoom recording where I look at their data and I describe how things are being influenced right now, what they're doing well, what they're not doing so well, and then kind of a future forward of where we're headed. So that's more analytical though.
I like that framework that you do. Since you and I have been working with the same athlete, I've gotten to see it kind of up close in person, and I've actually started doing it more just solely based off of that prompt. You doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a similar framework where I'll first off, if the workout's good, it's good job. Like, this is really hard. I always point out when I'm like really pressing an athlete, which I do, like I prescribe hard workouts and groups of hard workouts. There's kind of like no doubt about it. Whenever it's really challenging, I always make it a point to point out that, yes, this is really challenging. This is as much as I would give anybody. This is as much volume of intensity that I would give any elite athlete at any point of the year, and you crushed it. So they both know kind of the context of the overall workload, as well as the performance within that one particular workout, whether it was good, bad, or average, blah, 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 blah. And then the second piece of it is it's a little bit akin to what you just mentioned. Is a lot of the feedback I wrap into the context of what it means at the time. So we're building XYZ at this point of the year. When we move to another type of intensity, it's going to be supportive of that next type of intensity, kind of whatever that context is. I always want to keep a little bit of a finger or make sure that I'm communicating to keep a finger on that on the pulse of that particular athlete, so they kind of understand where they are in the entire process. Because a lot of people want to be in 100% race shape year round, and that's just not the case. Like, you can't, and you shouldn't be doing that. So I think a lot of those like touch points that really focus on, here's where you're at this one particular time, this is why it's meaningful for you right now, go a long way with the buy-in process.
Exactly. And I think to what we were talking about before, where endurance training can be monotonous and boring at times, the periods where training just to train, or general base period. And the reason I use that, it's a Tim Cusickism. I think it's wonderful because it's like, it's just a general training period. We could do all the things, including JT Kearney's burpee Bart Fest.
I like that. We're gonna patent that name.
Yeah.
Sorry, JT, we took it. I'll give you royalties on the back end.
Perfect. Thank you. And so to stay ahead of that for the athletes, like, man, another 4-hour run. What am I doing? Like, stay ahead of that by saying, we're doing these 4-hour runs so that ... And then I use, like, on Training Peaks or even in WKO5, you can do like performance management chart, like a future build 45 or 90 days. And you can just model the fitness of what's going to happen if you build the training. So build the training, then they see, oh, my CTL is going to go up to 112 by July. Cool. That's why I'm doing it. Got it.
That's why that's why the ATPs are so, I think that they're power, because you and I, we can coach without doing annual training plans.
Mm-hmm.
Fair statement.
Yeah. First,
no, like, we've been doing it for so long. We're like, okay, well, you have this kind of race in July. That means in April, you're going to be doing this. And then in February, like, we've been through that routine so much, but it's still important to kind of get it on paper in some form or fashion, electronic paper in some form or fashion, mainly from a communication tool to the athlete. Like, hey, here's a heads up on, like, what's coming up. Yes, we are actually thinking about what is coming up in July, August. Here's where your longest long runs are going to be, blah, 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 whatever it is. Even though we know, telling the athlete that this is what is coming down the pipeline, even though it might not be like the most precise thing, because you've always got to adapt to training. In our forecasting, I don't know about you, man, but my forecasting window, it doesn't extend beyond like 2 weeks.
I try to do 4, but it doesn't work with everybody.
I try to do 4 too, but I'm just like, I'm just going to do 3. Like, you probably used to build off of the recovery cycles, right? So just build one recovery cycle to the next. I might do that in like 10% of cases now. I'm building to my level of comfort of what I can predict. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like, I don't go into the thing saying, okay, I'm going to build out for, I look at what's coming up. Like, what are the anchor points? Is it a race? Is it a piece of travel? Is it, I have to deload, like, whatever the anchor points coming up in the calendar are. And I go, okay, I'm going to build to here. And I don't do it based off of a religious, I'm going to build 3 weeks or a month at a time, or to the next phase, or to the next race, or to whatever. I'm literally looking at it and going, I'm comfortable with predicting this much, and I'm going to build to here. And then I still have to change it.
Yeah.
What's going on in the ground? Like,
and that's a workflow from our end standpoint. What I've been doing recently, and it's helpful, I think, for both the athlete and the coach, is I tell them, I'll try my best to build out in detail 3 to 4 weeks in advance. That helps you in planning what's coming, and it helps us to see what's going on. But then I'll build out in general maybe 8 to 12 weeks. And so what I'll do is, just like on the Training Peak says, like, weekly goals, I'll put in weekly goals. We're doing intensive threshold development, volume increase, and 2 times strength training each week. That's what we're going to do. And so I'll have like that general model out. What I find is, whether the athlete looks at it or not, if I go in and I anchor it at like 2 weeks and be like, oh yeah, that's what we were doing here. Check the ATP, which took me 4 minutes to build. Okay, done.
Yeah.
I make those sounds too.
Really when you're actually typing. Done.
Really dynamic build over here.
I don't want to know that part of your workflow. I guess my point is to kind of like circle back on the high quality training session is making sure that you are continually reinforcing where you are in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're designing your own training, this is probably one of the biggest mistakes athletes who design their own training, who even know what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
when they design their own training actually do is they get lost in the daily detail of I'm going to do this super hard session or whatever, and they don't zoom back out to where that actually fits into the overall like master plan that you got right from the beginning, which is what we went through on the ground floor of things. I think, excuse me, consistently reminding yourself of where you are in the entirety of everything, the entire context of everything. I've got a huge race in August and I'm now in June. And what does that mean? That actually is really powerful of making sure the workouts actually sink in.
Yeah, agreed. And I, as a young coach, I used to do that often, where it's just like too fast coaching. I don't look back on the plan that I actually, and I would say I overdid the annual plan, and then I wouldn't remind myself of it. And I would just be in a hurry of building a week. Like I was a terrible coach.
I have one other thing in terms of how to create a high quality training that I've started emphasizing more with my athletes. So I'll go through it and I'll get your take on it. And that's to leave space after the workout is done to physically and psycho-emotionally wind down and chill the F out. And it's way easier to do with the elite athletes that you and I work with because that's what their job is than it is with the normal people who have to go back to soccer practice or go back to the office, or they've got an hour to work out and they're going to freaking shoehorn that, 55 minutes of a workout in their hour-long lunch break. But just reserving a little bit of time afterwards to go from, especially during the hard workouts, to go from fight or flight mode where you're just like crushing yourself to, okay, I'm just going to sit here for 3 or 4 minutes and just like wind down and realize that I'm not working out anymore. I've started to emphasize that more with my athletes, just as it's almost a way to enhance the adaptive response, right? Because you have all this stimulus and it kind of doesn't mean anything if you don't achieve the adaptations, right? Just going back to the JT workout analogy, you can create a huge stimulus and not get any adaptation from it for a whole variety of reasons. Well, one of those variety of reasons that you're not getting the adaptation from it is that you're not leaving any space between the end of the workout and when you're going to transition back into normal life. I've started seeing more research and just found other practitioners in the area that have started to focus on this more. And I've started to incorporate it a little bit more in kind of the instructive part of how to actually execute a workout is, yeah, go do the workout. This is the pace. This is the RPE. This is blah, blah, blah. But afterwards, chill out for 2 to 3 minutes and don't do anything. Don't turn your phone on. Don't open up Strava to see how many KOMs you just got. Like just sit there for a few minutes and chill out and then transition to the next part of your day.
It's beautiful. I've been doing the same thing. And when I tell my athletes 2 things. I tell them to remember that stress plus rest equals adaptation. Stressing is the training. Resting is really everything else. Adaptation is the goal. And then they say, well, I have 2 hours to train. If you got 2 hours, let's train for 100 minutes. Because I want to take 5 of those minutes just to I tell them, lay at the foot of your bed or lay on your bed and put your legs up against the wall. Or lay at the foot of the couch and put your legs up on the couch and just.
It's so dumb, but it just makes them sit still.
Just sit still. And there are people like, what about my Normatex? It's like, cool, but the whole setup is going to take longer than what I want you to do. And so it's almost like some mindfulness and meditation, but it's also resting and relaxing. Do it for 5 minutes, take a quick shower, get some food, away we go, rather than I just say time trial on to life, which everybody ends up doing too often, self included. But I would say when I do it right, and when my athletes do it right, we get a better adaptation.
Yeah, and there's reasonable research to suggest that is actually true. But this is something, I don't know if you're ever going to randomize controlled trial, something like this, because it's so hard to execute in the research world that you've got to go off of just a little bit of, okay, what is a reasonable best practice? I just think that space, and this is an I think statement in full effort of full disclosure. I just think that you get a more robust adaptive response if you just give a little bit of time, especially after the hard workouts or the long workouts, to just chill for like 3 to 5 minutes. It doesn't take long, just a few minutes, and however you want to do it. Put your legs up against the wall, meditate. I've got athletes that do mindfulness practice, like kind of like right then and then, or a breathing exercise. I kind of don't care what the conduit is, right? All those things are conduits to the exact same goal, which is just chilling out, right? Mm-hmm. As long as you're just chilling out and not focusing on doing anything, I think that is, I think it's a worthwhile enough practice that we should almost bake it into the training process. Maybe we can come up with like a segment in the workout builder that's like chill the F out segment.
Final step, stare at the wall.
I'm good with that.
I love staring at the wall.
Position your watch onto it.
I love it. No, for sure. Kristen will, like, my wife again, like, I'll be sitting there, like, just, it's like, what are you doing? I'm like, thinking.
Staring at the wall.
Staring at the wall.
Yeah, I'm adapting. No, that's what you can say. Yeah. I'm getting a more adaptive response. That's exactly what you do.
God, we're so nerds.
Okay. Let's pivot.
Pivot away.
Because I wanted to talk with you about this on air. High performance coaching model. I'll make a bold statement. I am hell bent on bringing this to trail and ultra running. I'm going to leave links in the show notes to a couple of other podcasts that I've done on this topic. I think I've dedicated, I think 2 or 3 of them just to this. It's not anything new. I'm not inventing anything that I'm going to take a lick of credit for. It's been around for a long, long time. And it's incredibly effective when done right. It's not easy to do it right. And I've just started to roll it out with, maybe 4 or 5 of my elite athletes. And so for the listeners out there that won't go and listen to the previous podcast, just to get this context, I'll give you the too long didn't read, TLDR. Is that what that stands for? Too long didn't read summary, synopsis. The nickel version is instead of one coach, me, being everything to the athlete, I'm the sport programming coach. I'm the run coach, right? I'm the sports psychologist. I'm the sports nutritionist. I try to stay in my lane with all of these various things that inevitably kind of like go into athlete performance. Instead of one person doing that, we bring a whole team of professionals, a whole team of domain experts, and wrap them around the athlete. So I would do the run programming. I bring in a specific strength training coach, we bring in a physical therapist, we bring in a nutrition coach, we bring in mental skills, and they all do their little part, and we're coordinated in all of our efforts. And like I said, I've rolled this out with a number of our athletes, and once again, I'm convinced that it's remarkably effective in the sport application that I'm in right now, which is trail and ultra running. We've seen it, be effective in other sports, but you kind of have to do it to see the proof point. I've seen enough of a proof point that I'm going to figure out how to formalize it as a product that people can buy. So it's not so ad hoc, but it works exactly the way that I describe it. The athlete comes in and I try to figure out if they're a good candidate for it first. And if they are a good candidate for it, then I start going through my digital Rolodex of practitioners that I've used over the years. Some of them are CTS coaches. Some of them are people that I just know. Some of them the athlete already has on board. That is the case every once in a while, where they'll have like a nutrition professional that they've worked with in the past, and then we just add people to the mix. And then we all become coordinated at some point. And the genesis for me as a coach, and I think this illustrates the point quite well, is when I was doing a year-end evaluation with one of my athletes who's already very, very good and this athlete was asking me, how do I get better? And I had to be very upfront. I'm like, listen, I can only move the physiological needle so much. Like, you're already really good. And sure, we're going to push and pull on all these physiological levers and use good training and all the things that we just talked about for the last hour, Adam. Sure, I can do that. But at a certain point, you got to realize how very marginally limited that is going to be. And the proposition that I came up with was, you are going to improve just as much, if not more, in all of the other areas as otherwise specified. Day-to-day nutrition, race day nutrition, psychology, even equipment can make I know you guys talk about this in the cycling world a lot, but we don't talk about it nearly enough in the running world. Even equipment can make a pretty impactful difference when you get it right. Sports psychology, all of those kind of like things that we typically think about as duties as otherwise specified, they are going to make a bigger difference in your performance improvement than what I can do on the training side. And so, since that's the proposition, here's the solution. We're going to bring the best people into this ecosystem of you, and they're all going to be, this is going to be your team so that you can continue to improve, because I'm like at the very end of my limitation, but I'm getting closer. I'm very acutely aware of that. That's the genesis of it, at least with me personally, is working with professional athletes and them asking me, how am I going to get better? Me realizing that the run programming gets more and more limited in that capacity, and the things as otherwise specified are going to take up a bigger proportion of the improvement pie, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think too, it takes a mature coach to realize that, to say, I can only do so much. Let's get other people on board. So I think that that's good. Second is ultra running. You guys and gals you're younger, right? Like, you're shaping this world. So
younger sport is what you mean.
Yeah. Younger in sport, not I think you're even older than I am.
We're like 10 years behind everybody else is usually with any of these things. Like, these high performance have been around in sports for like well over a decade. And I continually, and people who have that other sporting context, I don't have to describe this as elaborately because they know. But that's relatively rare in the ultra running sphere, and I have to take time to like, okay, this is how it works. Like,
even when you brought it up to me, I was like, how do you guys not have this? But then I'm like, oh yeah, you guys are so young. So like quick background. I mean, look at Red Bull athletes. Look at the structure there. Read anything about them. That's really what we're talking about. On the cycling side of things, we have it established, but it's like messy. I've been parts of organizations that have got it dialed, and it's awesome. And I'm part of some of those organizations right now. And I've got some organizations where it's just a hot pile of stinky flies everywhere. So, and I'm like, oh God. And it's frustrating. But in like the ones that are working really well, it's awesome. Athletes are just like fine-tuned going everywhere. This other one, athletes can be running into each other. And so it's not so much staying in your lane. It's about getting this the specialists in so that they can go deeper for that high performance athlete. But I think our role as coaches, we need to be specialists in endurance athlete programming and coaches, but we need to know how all those specialists orchestrate and work together. And so we need to become a little bit of a generalist in that sense to keep that like thing flowing.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It's been a really humbling experience too, because all of these things that I used to do for my athletes, and I still do with some athletes, the nutrition programming, not so much on the day-to-day piece, but the race nutrition programming. I'd say I'm heavily involved with a lot of my athletes, and or some of the strength training pieces. I just realize how terrible I am at that compared to the professionals, compared to the people who are like actual domain experts and do it for a living. And I would say that I'm somebody, and you know this about me, Adam, when I did do a lot of those things, I made sure that I knew my shit. Like when I was doing a lot of strength training program, I was in the gym. I was in the gym teaching people how to freaking squat and how to deadlift and how to do an overhead press and all these other things. And I would do it alongside of just like a personal trainer. And then I'd look at how to program. We'd go over to CSCS or the NSCA and we do specific, endurance strength training programming. It's not like I'm just like copy pasting from where, what are you pointing at me for?
Did you ever get up to 400 pounds on your deadlift, by the way?
I'm trying to do 500. I got up to like
500
or 10 or 4. I'm going to get stuck like right below 430 and I'm not going to be able to bridge the
It was
last.
impressive.
Yeah. I
seeing you, whether it was a socials or you were sending me some, I was like, it's like, you're not broken yet. Keep going, man. This is awesome. I thought you were going to hurt yourself.
It would take me like 4 years to get up to 500 and I'm not willing to do it that much. I cheat though and I do sumo. So people.
It's fine. You're moving,
I don't know.
You're moving metal.
There's a lot. Yeah, I know. Anyway. But my point with that is I'm just not making shit up, right? I tried to do as best as I can. And even with all that, I realize that it's different if I bring in somebody who's been doing it for 15 years. The other thing, and I didn't anticipate this part of it, and this is not relevant to the athletes, but it's actually relevant to the coaches. It makes me more efficient because I can punt. Mm-hmm. I can punt that stuff. I'm just like, what does Steph say? Steph is one of the go-to nutrition people. Stephanie Howe, a lot of listeners will recognize. She's not the only one, but she's one of the nutrition professionals that I've started using in these groups. Steph, you figure this out. Punt to you. Like I don't have to deal with it. Just give me the nickel version. give me the synopsis. You want strength training? Okay. Sarah Scazzaro or Nicole Rasmussen, two of our coaches. They both have fantastic strength backgrounds. I can punt that over to them and they can spend all the time doing the programming and getting the feedback and sending the videos back and forth and all that other stuff. That frees me up to do what I really do well, which is communicate with the athletes and do the run programming. Like it takes me out of the things that I'm not so good at or I'm below average at or average at and puts me more into the things that I'm really, really good at, which I think is just professionally actually really super rewarding.
Yeah. And so when we have an athlete like at this level, and it could be an elite athlete or it could be just a serious amateur too, in my opinion. Yeah. Once you've identified that they are at this level, I think this concept makes a ton of sense and incorporate all these people in, similar to, I don't know, a general practitioner, the cardiologist, the medical world has some of these aspects of it too coming in. It's a whole defunct thing, especially here in America. But from that concept, it shouldn't be like super crazy. Just know that, however you kind of do this, it's like, if you want that next level, like, be ready to pay for it in some form or fashion. And if you're super into it, if this is your thing, let's go, because these people exist and it's become super efficient. And in my opinion, I would say too, what's going to come down that some sort of AI will become part of a high performance team as coaches. I want it to, because I think just like Stephanie helping you out, it's going to make you more efficient.
Yeah. The AI tool that I've been working on, Adam, it's not to like let the cat out of the bag too early because we're still a long ways off, but it gets the programming side like 90% of what I would do, because it's modeled after me and it uses both like algorithmic type of logic as well as what traditional AI would be. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary. It's like I actually would given the situation, like when we've been testing out, it's like I would program that. I might change this thing, one workout here or 10 minutes over there or whatever, like based off of whatever bias that I'm coming into the day with. But it's remarkably good. I want to kind of go back
for me. I'm like, I want to chat APT, like bring it on.
Bring it. I think this is neither here nor there. I think that once people start to figure it out, the bottom 20% of the coaching market, and what I mean by that is like the kind of like the millhouse coaching that's just like program building and not coaching, right? That just goes away and gets replaced, or 90% of it just goes
static programs all gone.
It's all gone. It's a superior product.
One asterisk, so in case the listeners were like, that guy's an idiot, it's Chat GPT. I threw in a quick joke. Chat APT, Adam Pulford Training Systems, would be my tool that I would develop.
All right. Anyway, let's move on. I'll have another conversation about AI.
Coop's like, we're gonna edit that out for sure.
No. I mean, I've been very public that I've been working on this, and I don't think I have to like, from a business perspective, like try to be all like work on it in a black box and then reveal it all. Like I don't care if
everybody's working on it.
Yeah, everybody's working on it. I won't have first mover position. I understand that, but I think I'll have the best mover position once the thing gets up and running. Which that's another story. Anyway, so okay, let's go back to this value proposition, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree with you on the Intuit amateur side that some of the value that they get out of it is they're just all in, right? And this is just a way for them to be all in. It might not produce like superior results, or maybe it's very marginally superior as compared to them just training, right? Like for an amateur, meaning if you just did it versus you wrapped a whole team around some high level amateur, and then you could compare the results. Maybe the high performance thing is a little bit better, maybe not, maybe it's marginal or whatever, but you have a hard time making the case because unlike the situation that I originally presented you with, where the things as otherwise specified constitute a bigger piece of the pie than the programming, with the amateur, the programming still can kind of like dominate the improvement side of things. I think on the professional side of things, where 1% to 2% absolutely makes a difference. And you can go to any freaking race, and ultrarunning is starting to get this way. You can dissect the top 10 on a few percentage points. That becomes absolutely material at the end of the day. The Western States 100, top 10 might be separated by 30 or 40 minutes in a 15-hour race. That's not a lot. And when you get down to those like small fractions is where you need to kind of uncover every rock and stone and, look underneath the moss and try to find, whatever else is kind of it. And it does. I mean, we kind of like, we give the term marginal gains a little bit of a bad rap, but there's a time and a place to where all those little marginal things actually add up to something that is meaningful from a performance standpoint. And it's when the differential in the performances between first, second, third, and fourth is so small. That's where it can actually make a material difference.
Yeah, I fully agree on the professional athlete side of things. Professional athletes need this, in my opinion, and I think that like naturally,
word, man. Ooh, need. I like that.
No, I mean, again, I'm coming at the lens of cycling where y'all are it's
a requirement.
No. It's a requirement. Like the higher up you go, you need that. Otherwise, what are you doing here?
Can't compete. You just you literally can't compete.
Yeah, you're edged out. And to that point, for anybody listening here too, I've been leading some of these teams where I am like the generalist, and I'm getting the specialist to come in and do this. And it's really hard to orchestrate unless you have some of those ties and connections. I chose the coaching realm of things, and it makes me more happy. But I would say the professional athlete side of things and an amateur, I think it goes down to like identifying, because whether they're pro or amateur, identify when they need that team. Because when the professional athlete is still aspiring, it's like, you got some development to go. I can take this. Identify when they need this. If the amateur is like, I just want to learn as fast as possible. You're already like, I want it. It's like, you're not going to benefit from it. I want it anyway. Cool. Here you go. I want it. You're not going to benefit from it. Okay. Well, when? In a year. Okay. So it comes down to us being the filter of it.
Yeah. I have actually had to do that with a few athletes that, a few more kind of like recent athletes that I brought on board now that I have a template for it and I kind of have a choice. Like, do I just coach them, or do I kind of like wrap a team around them? And it is a choice, and you got to kind of like suss it out in terms of, is it beneficial? Is it necessary? Do you want to get ahead of it, so that they're kind of like used to the program or whatever? And I have not gotten that equation 100% correct. I will say it's not that it's like egregiously like difficult or anything like that, but especially with the new athlete, you don't always know how they're going to react to things until you actually put them in it. And because that human equation is so unpredictable, sometimes you just get that evaluation wrong. And I've done that at least once with these, where I put somebody in a team and it just wasn't the right kind of fit for anybody. I wasn't the right coach for them. Team wasn't the right team for them. The whole kind of thing didn't work out, and that's fine. That's some of that's on me in terms of not assessing up the situation. But I do think to use your cycling analogy, I think this is a bold prediction. We can come back 3 years from now and see if this is still see if this comes true. I think that 3 years from now, it's going to be a requirement in the ultra running side, just like it is a requirement on the cycling side.
I mean, I am like on the very cusp of ultra running world peering in at the moment. And I would say, why not 2 years? Why not a year? Like it's again, it's crazy.
We need a little bit of time. I think the first thing is there's absolutely an economic component to this.
Yeah.
Where the athletes have to be able to afford it, and that it's not universally true quite yet. Now that's going to come around, and it's how these things go. I mean, you see it on the cycling side. It works way slower than anybody wants it to, in terms of how people upgrade their individual pay and how the whole ecosystem gets, upgraded in their pay and things like that. That's gradually happening in ultra running, and then that economic reality will be the case more universally in a few years. I'm convinced of that, but it is not there now. I mean, they just don't earn enough money to be able to spend $1 or $2 grand a month on professional services, which is about what it takes. But the other side of it is I still think that just from a performance perspective, there's just a little bit more tide that needs to get turned. There's some athletes that do it, athletes that I don't coach that do it themselves. Tom Evans, who was the Western States champion last year, he's been very public about it. I have nothing to do with Tom's coaching, but he has a fantastic team around him, and he did it himself, right? The athlete, like, this is going to be my coach, and this is going to be my nutritionist, and this is going to be this, and this is going to be that, and he coordinates them all. He acts as like the high performance coordinator. So it does exist in certain in certain flavors, and you'll see more of it, but it's just going to take time, because the performance context just has to, just like anything else, it just has to season up a little bit and mature. But it's cool to see develop, to be honest with you. Like, 5 years ago, I couldn't even get people to do coaching. Or maybe a little bit longer. 5 years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I couldn't even get people to do coaching. It was hard. Like, I just need to run more.
Yeah. Which is, I remember sitting in on meetings about that, of like how we're going to actually charge runners for coaching because they like balk at a $20 entry fee to a race. On the cycling side of things, I should clarify. Road cycling has this as a culture, kind of a mainstream for the elite athletes.
Correct. I think that's an important distinction. Like the teams dictate it. So you get onto a professional cycling team, and the team actually has all the services available.
Good teams. Yeah, exactly. And when you go off-road, that's when things vary. If you actually have a team mountain biking, they will. And there's good teams and not so good teams, high funded teams, I should say, and then not high funded teams. And then you go into the wild, wild west black hole of gravel racing. And I could provide examples of everybody doing anything from what we're talking about, high end, very professional, and then the people who are like, I don't know, probably smoking peyote out in Patagonia and going for long rides and showing up to BWR and crushing it.
What's funny as an analogy to that, before we wrap up, is some of the brands on the trail running side have tried to do this, most notably Solomon. And I've had Guimier, who's been the kind of head of this program. I've had him on my podcast twice, one of them to talk about this very specifically. And it hasn't been a universal sell, it's hard for the brands to do it. And I'll give a really good, just a really poignant example of this to try to illustrate it. The brands are caught in this position where they are the employer. And when your employment tie is also the same entity that is providing some of the performance services, the athletes are kind of hesitant or can be hesitant to engage in those performance services because they might not want to know that the sports psychologist that they're talking to is getting paid by their employer. They might not want to engage in physiological testing that might show that they're a inferior athlete or whatever is kind of like conjured up in their head when it's getting paid for by the brand that is actually paying their salary. There's like some hesitation. There's some hesitation there. Now, I don't think that that's warranted. I don't think any of the brands would be using some of this high performance context to make economic decisions. Who's getting contracts, who's getting support, who's not getting support. I think that they're genuinely, I believe that they're genuinely doing this in the betterment of the athletes. But because of that potential conflict, right? Just the potential conflict, I'm not convinced that it's the best setup. I think that the best setup is for an independent group, a coach like me, who my sole charge, I want to see athletes perform. I have no other agenda. I don't have a marketing agenda. I don't, I certainly don't pay the athletes. Like my agenda is an athlete comes to me. I want to win a race. Okay, let's go do it. That's my agenda, period. I think that is the most pure way to set these things up where they're unadulterated and unencumbered by any of the other like nonsense that can kind of like float around things. And you even see this on the cycling side where it's very professionalized, where that conflict between one area, marketing, finance, or whatever, and the coaching side or the performance side, that's where the conflict actually arises. So I kind of take that as a little bit of a cue as I've been navigating this space on the ultrarunning side of things, where I just think the right vehicle for it is to exist outside of the brands and within something else that's more of a coaching entity. So anyway, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, just based on your experience on the cycling side, in terms of how the team is actually getting facilitated, whether it's through a brand, through a team, or where the athletes are actually like doing it themselves.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of both, and I would say some of like the best ways of doing this is if the team or the governing body of the athletes, say Canada, for example, gives an athlete a stipend to hire whatever coach they want. And then the athlete has some governance of who they work with. Because on teams where I've been associated with and somebody has to share their training peaks, athletes are even like, share with who? That sort of thing. And they're not even exchanging dollars. So when that athlete has autonomy and trust in who's ever going on. And that's why I agree with you that an autonomous sort of standalone coaching company that has a reputation of high performance, that's great. And if that funding can come from a governing body or the team itself, that's good. So if Solomon gives $500 a month to Jane Schmo to pay you, that would be great. As an example.
I don't know. I don't know how everything's going to get routed, and I'm sure it's not going to be universal, whether the athletes pay for it or the brands pay for it or the athletes pay for it through the brands or whatever. That economy, in my framework, I'm being really transparent on this podcast about how I'm figuring this out. In my framework, I'm figuring out the economy last.
Yeah. But that's
all the other performance stuff first. I'm like, how do I set up a team? Who's the right person for a team? Who are the right people I want like in these teams? Who's going to work together well? Like, how are we going to exchange the data? How are we going to be transparent? I'm figuring all that crap out right now. And then I'm just going to figure out the economic reality of it later. I'm kicking that can like far down the road because I want it to work first. And I just know I just know. I have a hunch, I have a good hunch that I'll be able to model it out second, but I'm not concerned with that right now. I'm not starting with your prototypical, like, oh, I've got $1,000 widget. Let's figure out who to sell it to. Like, right. I'm figuring out how it works first and then figuring out the reality of it second, or the economic.
As long as someone, right, you or whoever, can handle that economically to figure it out. That's what an entrepreneur does. That's what somebody making something, that's what a craftsman does. And it's the better way because you'll get buy-in over the long run versus selling the widget and pissing a bunch of people off and that sort of thing. And I think that in the coaching world, we've had to do that in some sense. Where I'll give you one example. One of the elite athletes I work with, initially I was like, hey, I'm not doing this for free, so here we go. What comes from the governing body? And it was like, because they have so she could have a strength coach, a psychologist, a nutritionist. They had allotment for all that, but because they had coaches on staff on like the governing body, they couldn't hire out a coach. So we had to like kind of back channel it a little bit just to be transparent.
You horn you into the psychologist side of it. So
yeah, so I was a psychologist. So it, like, do whatever it takes, but I think like, get results, be open about it, and the rest will figure itself out. But I think for anybody in the ultra running world, just look at Red Bull, look at the road cycling side of things. It's not perfect, but like the structure is there. And if you want the highest performance, you will have to go to those high levels and get more people involved to get those percentages, in my opinion.
I've modeled it kind of after like 5 or 6 different key ones. I remember I drew this all up on a whiteboard one day when I was going to figure it out, and I way overcomplicated it because I'm like, this exists, and here are the people that I know, and here's what I think are the most impactful. Like I picked, 4 or 5 different categories, and I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And very fortunately, I already had the people, the professionals that I knew were really good and that I personally trusted. That was actually a big part of it, is like I had to like personally trust the recommendations that I was giving to the athlete, because it still falls back on me, right? So if an athlete comes to me and says, okay, let's go build this team, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to know the people to go to. They're going to rely on me and my network to find the right people. And if I screw that up, that's my fault. That's not anybody, like that's me not making the correct match. And so very fortunately, I just happen to have not like I've got like hundreds of people, but I have a small network of people that I trust a lot and are really good at what they do. I don't know what I would have done had I not previously had that, because it's not like you can go and like start like interviewing people for it, because you have to work with them for a period of time, because you're the primary coach. It's your athlete that you're trusting them with. And like, it's really, I would have a hard time, maybe because I'm high control. You remember our Fibro B scores, Adam. I'm high in,
yeah. You and Jane. Yeah.
High in expressed control. And I'm not going to flick that recommendation over to somebody that I haven't worked with for a decade. And not a lot of people fit in that category.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider myself low control, or I wouldn't consider myself high control, but I probably messed it up enough to know that there needs to be some control to do this, right? And what's tricky about what you're doing is, I mean, you're doing business, and people will be like, oh yeah, people do business with those who enjoy doing business with and achieve results. So that's not anything new. The tricky part with you is once your people get filled up with capacity, now who?
Yeah.
So you're going to have to continually
scale. How do you scale? Fortunately, it's not a rapid scale problem to solve. Like it's like we're talking about a handful of people that are going to come into this, not like dozens. I mean, maybe it's dozens and dozens, but maybe it's 20 by the end of year 2 or something like that. I think that's a kind of a reasonable amount. But I just keep coming back to like, I'm telling you, Adam, every meeting, every text message, every group, WeChat or WhatsApp that I have with these teams, I keep coming back to the same sentiment. I'm like, this is fucking cool. Like it just everything. Every time I go to even when I work with you on these things, I'm just like this. Like it's just so neat to see it unfold. And I know that's a lot of personal sentiment that people are going to like listen to. People are going to listen to and go, this doesn't make a difference, one way or the other. But it's been, I don't know. It's just been really neat to unfold, even in its early stages, that it's that I'm going to continue to kind of like push the envelope and just do more of it.
Yeah, man. And I would encourage you to keep pushing and refining, because what you're kind of saying there is, when you invite these professionals in to work with your athletes, the Koop algorithm gets smarter too. It makes you more efficient. You learn something from Stephanie over here. You learn something from Sarah over here, and be like, that's that little missing link there. And and then your athlete gets better. And that's kind of like the iron sharpens iron sort of analogy as you go, that high performance teams and networks provides. Here is the sword.
Yeah, it 100% makes me better. But I mean, on all levels, I mean, it makes me a better generalist, as we were talking about earlier, because I get to see how the specialists do it. And then if I ever have to do it, I've just got better framework for it. It literally makes me more efficient as a coach. Like if you wanted to take the most raw measure of efficiency, how much time does it take me to work with any one single athlete? This reduces that time, because I can punt, as I was mentioning earlier, I can punt a lot of things that I was previously spending time on, and it's a win-win. It's a double win. The prescription is better, right? The prescription analysis is better because you have a real domain expert doing it. And I save time. It's triple win. And the athlete's obviously better, right? Mm-hmm. And the last thing, we're going to let it go after this one, that should not go, we would be remiss to not say this, is that the athlete has so much confidence when they've got a team around them, and they know.
I was going to say in the team, yeah.
They know that the prescription is correct, that the analysis is correct. That just engenders so much confidence that when they step on the start line, they're like, "I've done everything right." Like, here I am. I'm at the start line of this big race, and I've done everything. Like, that element it's worth more than my programming. Fully admit it. The confidence side of it at that level, like, sure, I'm going to program smart. Like, that's my deal, is doing programming. I'm sure I'm going to get that right. But like, the confidence that they get from like having that network around them I think that's worth more from a performance perspective than what I can actually program.
No, you're absolutely right. It gets that confidence gets built through a good process. But when I've got an athlete that gets to the start line, that has the sports psychologist, has the nutritionist, has the strength and conditioner, has the coach, has the team director, has the tactic director, like everybody in their ear, she's going to be like, "Fuck yeah!"
You see, like, let's race. It's palpable. I didn't anticipate that. I didn't anticipate how palpable the confidence piece was.
Yeah,
because I can compare and contrast. And I'm not saying that like every athlete is a candidate for this. I'm not saying that. But it is palpable when you have an athlete transition from just me working with them to a team. That confidence piece, everything is palpable. I mean, the fact that they have a professional strength coach is absolutely. Sarah doing their strength programming is 100 times better. Shout out to Sarah Scazzardo. She's a freaking wizard. Is 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times better than me doing their strength training program. And I'm not
Brazilian times.
I'm a Brazilian times, and I'm not bad at it. I'm okay at it. Like, I'm not a freaking dummy in the weight room. I can like get myself around some freaking iron, but she is a gazillion times. Better at it. But the whole confidence piece of it, having seen it like during the transition, at least with the athletes that I've transitioned, and I think that I've picked the right ones to do it with. It hasn't been everybody, but it will be more and more as the years go on, because you have that A/B comparison. It's just palpable. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, I see it in the programming, I see it in the conversation, I see it in just like even the workout feedback, right? Going back to that, the context of the feedback has more, just has more confidence associated with it. It's cool. I don't know. It's cool.
Yeah. And you can't overlook the element of self-belief when it comes to achieving a goal or winning, because I'll guarantee you the person who believes they're going to win may not win all the time, but the person who believes they're not going to win won't win.
Yeah.
Typically.
That's very rare. Like, you hear that like every once in a while, like, oh, I didn't think I was going to do it. Like, that's a really rare story.
at that level.
At that, at the highest level. Like sometimes you hear, I didn't think I'd make the cutoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I get that. You hear that a whole lot more often. But at the highest level, you do have to have a lot of belief that you can do what you're setting yourself out to do, whether it's win or set a course record or get in the top 3 or whatever that goal is you have to have the belief behind it. And I think having a team, not just one person, a team behind you, I think that in most situations, not in all, but in most situations engenders more of that belief than having one single person can. One single person can make a big difference. That's what I did for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of success with that, but I just think it's better when you get more professionals in there.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we're going to call it there. We're going to do this more.
Let's do it.
This is not the Time Crunch Cyclist podcast, so I can go on for 2 hours. You keep your podcast to like, what, 30 minutes or something like that?
Tight and to the point.
We're verbose and all over the place.
For sure. I actually love podcasts like this because the time is not the pressure. I think like if anybody is interested in what I do, check out the Time Crunch Cyclist podcast. It's great. If anybody loves like the John Oliver sort of thing where he just like has one big topic, but then kind of like has these other like little things that he weaves into it too. That's essentially what it is for endurance coaching and training stuff. So, but yeah, it's straight and to the point, no fluff and stuff, no philosophical rabbit holes, but I think that fits for some people. I think having dialogue like this with what Koop's doing on the podcast and what Koop is doing like in the ultra running space, 30-minute podcast doesn't fit for what he's doing.
You gotta have a long run, man. Like 30 minutes, like people won't even lace their shoes up for 30 minutes. Come on.
Koop's just warming up right now, and I'm like, oh, get me off this microphone.
I think the next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna bring on one of our whole teams, and we're just gonna go through it all. I just want to go through it all. Like, just here's how we did it.
Yeah, you should do that.
Transparent about it. It's not like I don't want to gatekeep anything. I do think it's cool. But I think the listeners would get a kick out of how it actually works, and then maybe we can kind of cajole some of the athletes into some like real time examples of it. I think that'd be super insightful. And I whenever I do it in podcast form, I always learn something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be really cool. I'd listen to it.
Oh, sweet. Oh, there you go. There's my litmus test right there. If Adam listens. All right, man. I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Koop. Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, there you have it. There you go. Much thanks to Adam for coming on the podcast today and enlightening us a little bit about his framework on what constitutes quality training. I hope you guys got a lot out of that. Perhaps made you think about your training and how you design your training and how you give feedback on your training just a little bit differently. I also hope you guys enjoyed the banter at the end about some of this high performance coaching stuff, which I am determined to continue to bring to light. And I am absolutely thrilled about what we have been able to do with it thus far with some of the athletes that we have. Hope you all enjoyed the podcast. If you did, go give it a rating or review in iTunes, or you can just share it with your friends and training partners. This always makes a great long run companion. And so if you like this podcast, which always comes to you without any advertisement, sponsorships, or endorsements of any kind, the best way that you can help the podcast out is just to share it with your friends, give it a like, and whenever you see me out on the races, tell me what episode that you like the most. That is always very meaningful to me. All right, folks, that is it for today. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.